December 20th, 2019, the release date of Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. It's hard to believe that it's almost been 7 years since the end of the sequel trilogy and, along with it, the end of the first era of Star Wars projects post-Disney buying Lucasfilm. It's also been 7 years of almost constant fever dreams about this fucking movie. I love Star Wars. I even try my best to appreciate the not-so-great stuff that doesn't gel with me all that much. I also love the sequel trilogy, or at least 2 parts of it. But for all this time, I've never been able to fully explain why Episode 9 frustrates me so much. So, to commemorate both the recent 10th anniversary of The Force Awakens, as well as Star Wars' return to theaters this summer, I'm going to talk about the one Star Wars movie I've never stopped thinking about against my will. Also, really quick, the vibe of Star Wars discourse online has been hostile for the better part of about 3 decades, and it's pretty much only gotten worse since 2015, and I'm here to say that furthering that hostility is not my intention with this video at all. Whether or not you like Episode 9, I simply just want to talk about what I think without insulting your intelligence for liking something that I don't. After all, Star Wars is pretty important to me, and I would assume you as well, but at the end of the day, these are movies about wizards in space. That being said, I truly do think that I hate Episode 9. And the quickest reason I can give, as sort of a thesis for the video, is that I think it's a movie that's incurious about Star Wars as a franchise, and ultimately as a brand. Before The Last Jedi even released, Disney pulled a Disney and fired the original writer-director for Episode 9, Colin Trevorrow, and hired back J.J. Abrams to make an entirely new movie that was more in line with what they wanted. A vision that later would seemingly succumb to executives' panicked responses to the online reception to The Last Jedi, as well as the middling box office of Solo. And the final movie that we got is a sort of hodgepodge of ideas and themes that don't really work as a single movie, and work even less as the ending to a trilogy, let alone the ending to an entire saga. And to be honest, all the film's problems really begin with old Palpy. I don't know whether it's worse to call him Palpy or to call him Sheev. Episode 1. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? Emperor Palpatine returning as the main antagonist for Episode 9 is a bad foundation for multiple reasons. I've just never been big on bringing him back at all, even when the extended universe did it, back when that was canon. I'm not fully against all character resurrections. Star Wars has done that multiple times before. The Emperor's death in Return of the Jedi was fundamental to Vader's redemption, so to just bring him back off screen right at the very end of the now dubbed Skywalker saga makes that sacrifice feel a bit useless in retrospect. The entire point of the sequel trilogy and the way that it was written was to slowly pass the baton from the original characters to the new ones. And the sequel trilogy already had a Palpatine equivalent in Snoke, who, mind you, is very dead at this point. Don't worry, I'll address that in a second. And the entire ending of The Last Jedi set up that Kylo was now the supreme leader of the galaxy. Episode 9 was meant to be his movie. And the opening crawl lets you believe that this will be the case when it says that Kylo Ren wishes to destroy any threat to his power, and his initial goal in the movie is to kill the Emperor. That's interesting. Conflict between our 2 Sith. I mean, technically, Kylo isn't a Sith, but I don't really want to get into that. And yet, within 3 minutes of screen time, Snoke is wiped off the board altogether and devalued completely, posthumously, and Kylo is immediately brought onto the Emperor's payroll. And honestly, once Palpatine is introduced and he hires his ex-apprentice's grandkid, Kylo gets to do nothing. He's mostly an errand boy in this movie, who does plan to betray Palpatine, until he gets redeemed halfway through the movie, and still ends up betraying Palpatine. And if there's one thing this trilogy is known for at this point, it's missed potential. But Rise of Skywalker actively takes all of the steam out of not just Snoke, by literally making him a manufactured clone who was simply a mouthpiece for the Emperor, but it takes the steam out of Kylo Ren as well, both as a villain and just as a character. Kylo always works well when he's constantly shifting between the overtly evil persona and the whiny, angry man underneath. And both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi showed us that both are very dangerous. And yet Kylo isn't really anything in this movie. By episode 9, Ben has nobody left once Leia dies. And while it's a nice idea to some that he has Rey or whatever, you know, if you're into that sort of thing, for all intents and purposes, Ben has nothing left. He is the last shred of the Solo, Organa, and Skywalker names left in the galaxy. And how would someone like him, a person who's only fueled by hatred and anger towards his loved ones, function when there's nobody else left to blame, when it's too late to undo the damage? And instead of doing anything with that concept, episode 9 just sort of shrugs its shoulders and decides to reinstate the master-apprentice dynamic with him and Palpatine, even though they share like one scene together. Palpatine is really not in a lot of this movie. The idea that everything Kylo has done, all of his wants and aspirations, have just been the tool of Palpatine wanting revenge is just really dumb. But alright, Palpatine's the true bad guy. Then why does he have such little presence in this movie? And I don't just mean screen time. I get it. Ian McDiarmid can't do the flips anymore. Palpatine and his plan for the final order of Star Destroyers that all have a mini Death Star cannon in them, it feels like such a smaller threat than the movie is trying to tell me that it is. On paper, this is galaxy-ending shit, the worst thing our heroes have ever faced, and yet, it feels like nobody's really responding the way that they should. Like, just our main character's reaction to Palpatine being alive is especially weak. Rise of Skywalker's most infamous line, "Somehow Palpatine returned," was a very popular meme back in 2019 because it's just a really bad piece of dialogue. Not too different from the "they fly now" thing, but the difference between that and this scene is that is just hokey summer movie clips just meant to add to a scene. Fluff, if you will. But "somehow Palpatine returned" is not just a terrible line, it is an awful way to convey information this big to the Star Wars universe. Our equivalence would be like if Ronald Reagan woke up and just showed up on CNN tomorrow. We don't hear the message Sidious releases across the galaxy, you know, the one that they recorded and put into fucking Fortnite. We don't even get to see our characters' first reactions. We get to hear Poe relaying the information to like 30 rebels who are reacting as if they found out Chipotle is out of carne asada. So okay then, why? Why is Palpatine back? What narrative purpose does his character actually serve? J.J. Abrams seems to think that it's a natural conclusion to the entire saga for Sheev to return. And yeah, well, that's a nice excuse. I do not think it's the truth. Adam Driver has stated in an interview that Kylo was never meant to be redeemed from the beginning.
Did you know that at least you're playing Vader 2.0?
I did, yeah. And I had an overall arc that in mind that he wanted to do. His idea was that almost the opposite journey of Vader, where Vader starts the most confident, the most committed to the dark side, and by the last movie he's the most vulnerable and weak, and he wanted to start at the opposite, where this character was the most confused and vulnerable, and by the end of the three movies would be most committed to the dark side.
When did it change? With
Ryan, he took it into a different direction, but still it kind of still tracked with the character. Then the last one, it changed into being, about them and the dyad and things like that, and kind of evolving into Ben Solo. That was never part of it.
That wasn't either?
No.
So how do you give a main antagonist that's pretty irredeemable by this point in the trilogy a heel turn? Simple. You introduce a bigger bad guy. How do you do that in only one movie? Well, you can take an idea from the extended universe that certain fans have always complained isn't canon anymore and just toss that into the script. Now you have an entire legacy antagonist where you don't have to set up or explain his appearance whatsoever. Like it's plug and play. A lot of people blame the issues of the sequel trilogy on the fact that Disney didn't plan it, or at least there wasn't some sort of supervisor overseeing all three movies. But I'd argue that that's one of this trilogy's strengths, allowing each director and writer their ability to leave their stamp on the universe with no firm restrictions on what can and can't be done. And that's very evident in episodes 7 and 8. J.J. Abrams is talented at conveying nostalgia, as well as introducing interesting story threads while constantly keeping that fun summer movie pace. Where's Luke Skywalker? Why is Kylo Ren evil? Who really is Rey? All that stuff is interesting to think about, but not really distracting from the overall fast-paced, lighthearted movie. Rian Johnson then picked up the baton and followed up on the threads that The Force Awakens left off on, all the while adding the commentary and character drama we're used to seeing from him. Where is Luke Skywalker? He's hiding away in exile. Why is Kylo evil? evil, Luke played a part in sending him towards the dark side. Who is Rey? Nobody, at least compared to what we're used to in this franchise. You can dislike the choices both Abrams and Johnson made, or disagree with either of them, but it would be incredibly disingenuous to watch both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi and not walk away feeling like they're at least two parts of one story. Two very different movies with almost diametrically opposed themes and executions that still, together, come to make 2/3 of a good trilogy. However, The Rise of Skywalker actively dedicates large chunks of its runtime to go back and just sort of smear whiteout across The Last Jedi, the biggest of which being Episode 2, Rey Palpatine. Wait, no, Rey Kenobi. No, wait, she's Rey Guan-Jin. I do not believe at all that J.J. Abrams dislikes Rian Johnson or The Last Jedi. Both directors seem too nice to have that sort of relationship. But I do believe that Abrams either does not understand The Last Jedi on a thematic level, or just refuses to work within the confines that are set for him by a previous writer. And it honestly may be both. The problem with Abrams' writing is that he loves an interesting story idea, but he can't really finish one in a satisfying way. Or at least that's been the conception behind the ending of Lost. I don't know, I was too young to be at the ground level of that. It's natural for a Star Wars movie to retcon stuff. It literally happens in the very first Star Wars sequel. But in The Rise of Skywalker, there's so much undone. Kylo's entire arc in TLJ was to reject the past, symbolized by him destroying his helmet, meant to resemble his grandfather's. But in Episode 9, it's almost immediately repaired by a monkey, as if he no longer believes that at all. The last scene of Episode 8 shows Rey with the two halves of Anakin's saber on the Falcon, a physical representation of how broken the Resistance is. But in the 1 year span between it and Episode 9, Rey just repaired it, instead of making her own. Like she does anyway by the end of the movie. The entire point of Luke losing his saber in Empire was the chance for him to grow into himself as a Jedi, and it's pretty much the same case for Rise of Skywalker. Rey has been trying to latch onto anything in order to understand her place in the galaxy. First Han, then Luke, and to a certain extent, Ben, only to discover that she's nobody, severing any chance she had of an easy answer, thus allowing herself the chance to grow. And her off-screen development during this time jump could have easily been conveyed with a new lightsaber. But instead, she just repairs Anakin's because that's the thing we recognize, and people would be mad if it was destroyed forever, quite literally going backwards. Rey and Kylo's connection devolves into pure hatred on both sides by the end of The Last Jedi, only for 9 to introduce whatever the fuck this is. Even small things like Rose being underutilized in Episode 9 following her actress, Kelly Marie Tran, receiving massive amounts of harassment. I get that someone had to stay and be used for Carrie Fisher's scenes because of her passing, and granted, that's one of the few things I think Episode 9 handled really well. But Rose's final scene in the movie, and ultimately in Star Wars, is her and the other Resistance troops being forced to leave Finn behind in an attempt to sacrifice himself. This is after the entire ending of The Last Jedi, which was the exact opposite, pretty much undermining everything that ending was trying to say. I get it, even I have criticisms of that ending in The Last Jedi, but what the fuck? Or Admiral Akbar's son named Junior taking his place since Akbar died in The Last Jedi. I completely forgot that people were really mad about that. Or Luke catching his father's saber, where I quite literally heard half of my theater clap when that happened, but the worst of which is Rey's familial connection. This was a big mystery box hinted at in The Force Awakens and led to about 2 years worth of fan theories, all of which with equal validity since it was set up without really an answer in mind. Most fans theorized that Rey was related to Luke, or maybe she was Obi-Wan's granddaughter, since you can hear both Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor speak during her Force vision in that movie, only for Rian Johnson to confirm in The Last Jedi that she's nobody. Her parents are drunks who sold her into slavery to buy more booze, and there's no grand secret waiting for her, and I liked that. Then, in Episode 9, it's revealed that all of that was actually a lie, and she's really Palpatine's granddaughter. And I hate it. A lot. It's not as if secret familial connections are new to Star Wars. Vader was not meant to be Luke's father until Empire Strikes Back, and Leia wasn't meant to be his sister until Return of the Jedi, thank God. But again, this choice fundamentally misunderstands what Episode 8 and even what Episode 7 were all about. JJ You made that one! The conclusion of Rey's arc in both episodes 7 and 8 is that her place in the galaxy has nothing to do with her heritage and some secret family waiting to embrace her, and everything to do with her place now with her found family in the Resistance and her place as a Jedi. So to make what is essentially an entire movie in response to theory videos from 2015 and not the movies they're meant to be sequels to, feels like it misses the point. The only way I could see why Palpatine was brought back and why he's Rey's Pop is a shorthand for the audience to convey Rey's internal struggle with the dark side, which is sort of her arc in this movie, I guess. And it's really fucking lame. Rey's entire conflict in episode 9 solely comes from the fact that she's related to Palpatine, and that makes her afraid that she'll be evil. Not that she's actually done anything bad at all or is actively giving in to the dark side, but she's related to someone evil. And maybe this is a decade worth of Star Wars arguments clouding my vision, but at worst it feels like Palpatine's inclusion is an explanation for why Rey can use the Force so well. Rey's powers aren't because she's in tune with the Force, it's because she's got Sheev's blood in her. The Force dyad is no longer just something Snoke and the Force did to connect the two most opposing sides of the light and the dark. Now it's because they both have superpower blood in them. By the logic of episode 9, Luke losing his temper in Return of the Jedi was not a decision he made out of anger or care for his sister, but his true nature peeking through. Or something. I get that that's ultimately Rey's fear and she's proven wrong, obviously, but the movie ultimately backs the idea up with the ending, that Rey should erase her heritage and choose her own path, not by being her own person, but by tying herself into the good family in Star Wars as opposed to the bad one. Beyond being just a villain we've seen before and we can recognize, Palpatine really only exists to represent the internal dark side that Rey could tap into, which is legitimately the worst reason any Star Wars character could potentially fall to the dark side, and I don't even buy that she has any ill intent for a minute. And that leaves Palpatine to just do what he did in Return of the Jedi all over again. And if you've been paying attention, they already did Return of the Jedi. The entire point of The Last Jedi was to skip to the end of what we've expected from the original trilogy, giving way for a new ending that could be completely original. But whether through his dedication to nostalgia, his restricted view on what Star Wars could be, or his difficulty to make endings, JJ just does Return of the Jedi. Again, but it's like 3 times bigger, so it's completely different. Palpatine's place in the story, both through his connection to Rey, as well as his place as an antagonist, feels so weak, and it's understandable as to why. I think that Palpatine was a late addition in the script. It's mostly speculation, but I don't think that it's an insane claim. Matt Smith's entire role in the movie was completely scrapped, and Daisy Ridley has gone on in interviews about how indecisive they were about choosing who she would be related to.
Have you been keeping Rey's secret from the beginning? Did you know?
No. At the beginning, there was toying with like an Obi-Wan connection, and then there were like different versions, and then it really went to that she was no one. And then it came to episode 9, and JJ pitched me the film and was like, oh yeah, Palpatine's granddaddy. And I was like, awesome. And then 2 weeks later, he was like, oh, we're not sure. So it kept changing. So then even I filming and I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be.
Abrams is not unfamiliar with altering his stories mid-production. Poe was supposed to die in The Force Awakens, but thanks to a request by Oscar Isaac and a rewrite, he was able to survive. My issue is not that the plot changed or that different ideas were thrown around. That's how you develop stories. It's that there's absolutely no driving force behind this choice or this movie at all. And that issue is prevalent throughout the entire movie, but especially in one specific character. Episode 3, The Forgotten Protagonist. This is the part where I complain about the way Finn was handled. In a lot of ways, John Boyega has sort of become a Robert Pattinson figure in Star Wars, where his vocal conflicted feelings about his work in a franchise with a negative track record online is used as a defense by those that dislike it, almost as a shield for their opinions. See? It's so bad that even he hated working on it. People say this, and yet most recently, both actors have said that they are not against returning to their respective franchises if given the chance. And probably probably the paycheck to go along with it. I say this not because I am the weird crossover of a Twilight and a Star Wars fan, but while the hate for both franchises, especially during their respective eras, is very comparable, I'm much more obliged to understand Boyega's frustration by the end of the sequel trilogy, mainly with how little he was given to do. Finn was the first character we saw in the teaser trailer for episode 7. He was everywhere except in China. He was given equal billing with Daisy Ridley, both in marketing and in the movie itself. But once Rey is revealed to be the Jedi at the end of The Force Awakens, it's almost like JJ no longer had fun playing with this toy. Poe Dameron is often compared to Han from the original trilogy, mostly because they're both cocky pilots, whose actors very quickly wanted the characters to die by the end.
Should've just let them kill him off in that first one, really. I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
How do you feel about the film?
It's good.
It's good.
I think it's pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But to me, Finn is much closer to Han on a story structure level. Both initially wanted to avoid their call to help the rebellion until they eventually had a change of heart. And then, once that's done, they're sort of left with nothing following the end of the first installment. Granted, Han had his romance with Leia, and Finn got to continue growing a bit in episode 8, where he learned to not just fight for Rey, but to notice the world around him and stand up for an ideal. And episode 9 is set a full year after The Last Jedi, so you'd think something would happen in between that time. And no, nothing happens at all. This time skip is not used to the film's advantage whatsoever. Outside of Rey and Poe butting heads one time at the beginning, it feels like nothing was done to evolve any of these characters off screen. Like, the main trio have quippy banter, which is fine, I don't mind that, but outside of that, all of our characters were seemingly left in stasis at the end of The Last Jedi, which, despite not being ideal, Rey and Poe already had definitive arcs set before them. Rey is the last Jedi who's completing her training under Leia, and Poe has grown into a matured leader of the Resistance. But that leaves Finn with nothing. If anything, episode 9 backtracks on Finn's character, whittling him back down to the guy who really only cares about Rey and just screams her name. Like, during the main lightsaber duel in the movie between Rey and Kylo, Finn is just yelling Rey's name. Like, running towards the fight and yelling her name. What the fuck does that do? And this is unfortunately where I have to talk about the Rey and Finn thing, without getting too deep into it, or shipping culture online. It sounds like a whole bag of worms that I am not paid to talk about what the fuck ever. In The Force Awakens, there was clearly a romantic vibe between Rey and Finn. At the very least, a one-sided one from Finn to Rey. But for one reason or another, probably due to Adam Driver's pectoral muscles being shown, Reylo became the main relationship in the fandom. Listen, if this video was on any other franchise, I would not be talking about this. Typically, fanfiction does not have any effect on the trajectory of a franchise, but because this is Star Wars and because someone at Disney likes to torture me specifically, it's kind of important here. In one of her, I think, 3 videos on episode 9, Jenny Nicholson pointed out that none of the episode 9 scripts or pitches ever threw around a Rey and Finn romance at all, and that's always bothered me. There might be a bunch of other factors at play, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that this is something I'm used to seeing before. Andre Unvictorious, anybody. It's hard to look at all the information we have and not come to the conclusion that the Star Wars fandom and the writers themselves seem a little uncomfortable with their main couple being an interracial one in their space franchise. It can be hinted at, and Finn can be into her, but if she's into him, then the world will go to hell in a handbasket apparently. Even if I'm wrong, even if this wasn't the intention whatsoever, it's hard to not come to this conclusion because Finn is still written in a way where his entire focus is on Rey. Bars. Finn's one big contribution to the story in episode 9 is through the classic mystery box, when all the main characters think that they're going to die, and Finn goes to tell Rey something, only for them to survive, and then Finn gets nervous when he's asked about what he's going to say, and he doesn't tell her since there's other people around. And I know what you're asking, what was Finn going to admit? Well, according to J.J. Abrams, he was going to tell Rey that he could use the Force. Let me make this fucking clear. In no world do I believe that Finn's last words before he was going to die would have been, Rey, I'm Force sensitive. only to drown in sand. To be fair, his force sensitivity is hinted at again at the very end, so they can find the main antenna or whatever the fuck they do in the third act, but also so he can sense Rey's in trouble through the force. And like, yeah, I guess that's a nice reveal, but even him being force sensitive is not really about Finn as a character, and more so his connection to Rey. It's only added so he can still think about her when they're not on screen together. Finn is just back to yelling Rey's name because she's the main character and nobody can do anything else so that she looks cool. Finn only uses the Force to worry about Rey. He wants to tell Rey that he can use the Force, but can't. And also, he never does before the end of the movie. Mind you, this is a character who fought Kylo Ren without being in tune with the Force at the time whatsoever. And now he's just there, standing in the background, waiting for his turn to arrive. Yes, Finn gets to meet another defective stormtrooper named Janna, but they don't really do anything. Like, yeah, they ride horses on the Star Destroyers, and that was a big practical thing that they really wanted to do for some reason. But at the end of the day, they're just another part of this massive battle on Exegol. But it's not like the two of them go and stage a stormtrooper coup or anything specific to their shared background. So why go out of your way to introduce a new character when this very well could have just been Rose? And it's so frustrating because a Force-sensitive stormtrooper is the coolest thing ever. There's so many cool costume ideas that can come from that. And especially as a black teenager, seeing someone like me represented in the Star Wars franchise was cool to see. Like, imagine a sequel trilogy with dual Jedi protagonists, where Rey and Finn were truly on equal footing, and one of them wasn't just tossed to the side. Seeing JJ take this character and do his mystery box thing, where he sets up Finn as this really interesting guy, only to see his own conclusion with that same character just completely throw Finn away like an old chew toy, is upsetting. What's even worse is seeing multiple stories post The Force Awakens write similar characters to Finn. Cara Dune, Iden Versio, Lyndon Javes, Terramin, and Andor. You probably don't know who Lyndon Javes is. It's the guy who defects in squadrons. While none of these characters are important as Finn is, they're at least given a level of care and time and space to exist that Finn never really had. Man, I'll be honest, even when he's underwritten and misused, I still love Finn. Top 10 Star Wars character right there, man. Just give him a comic or something. I need something. I need something beyond the Lego sequel trilogy. Episode 4, Finale. Okay, so there's clearly lots of stuff that I didn't like in The Rise of Skywalker, but it would be unfair to not mention some of the things that I enjoy before we reach the end. I liked the space adventure vibe the movie was going for. Getting to see these characters act as a full group before a final send-off was a lot of fun. I loved Pisana, probably my favorite planet in this movie. I just love ridiculous planets with cute practical aliens, man. Speaking of which, I think Episode 9 is exactly what I imagine Star Wars looks like. Not just through the practical effects and insane amount of VFX that went into this movie, but all the color as well. The blue tint mixed with the constant red lights makes for a very Christmassy look. Man, it better look good because this is the most expensive film ever made. Leia's death is really effective here. Out of the original trio, her passing is given the most reverence, understandable given Carrie Fisher's real-life passing, before the production on Episode 9 even began. I like the idea of Ben being so torn up by murdering his father that he can see and imagine an accurate version of Han, one not marred by his hatred and anger like his past visions have been, giving him the equivalence of a visit from a Force ghost, but instead being driven by his self-hatred over the things that he's done. I might not be big on Kylo being redeemed, but this was probably the best way to do it. Having the galaxy ultimately be saved by the remnants of the rebellion, effectively a bunch of civilians striking back against the Empire, is great, and probably one of the best ways to end this trilogy. It's one of the few political stances the trilogy actually takes, but hey man, that's just a completely different topic I don't want to touch. But even the good stuff in Episode 9 cannot save the finale. The final 20 minutes of The Rise of Skywalker are just so boring. I didn't enjoy them in the theater, and I arguably enjoy them even less each time I rewatch this movie. Yes, while I like that the galaxy is saved by everyday people fighting back, it is still just used to recreate the ending of Episode 6, down to Palpatine opening the temple to show Rey that the rebels are losing. Yes, while hearing tons of Jedi across the franchise speak to Rey is such a satisfying moment, it is followed right after by Rey deflecting Palpatine's electricity, and him dying from it. You'd think he'd stop doing that after the first time it failed. Yes, introducing new force powers is fun and has been done in Star Wars since Empire, but it is solely used in Episode 9 to justify this super shoehorned romantic moment between Rey and Ben at the very end. Rey and Ben's connection has never read as romantic to me, and in my opinion, almost all the Reylo pairing was solely done not due to chemistry between the two actors, but due to expectations of a pairing with the main co-stars in contemporary media. Listen, if you like it in fanfiction, fine. But in the text of the movies themselves, the two had a mutual hatred at the end of Episode 8 that was just completely ignored by the opening of Episode 9, just so that this scene gives certain parts of the fandom what they want. I honestly think that the kiss is the most spineless thing in Episode 9. It just goes to show how little this movie was made from a personal perspective, and was more so just an offering to fans. For Reylo shippers, hey, you get to see the pairing be acknowledged. Cool. But if you're not a fan, that's okay too, because Ben immediately fucking dies right after. This is like if Draco kissed Harry right before his family ran away in Deathly Hallows Part 2. This is like if Will and Mike kissed right before Will joined the IDF. When I saw Ben and Rey kiss, I knew that I wouldn't rewatch this movie. And when I saw Chewbacca getting a medal being played off as a satisfying moment, I knew that I would not fondly remember this story at all. Chewie not getting a medal has been a joke for years, not a legitimate fan complaint, and it's not something that should be addressed randomly at the end of a different trilogy. And then the final scene is almost a complete microcosm of why I deeply dislike this movie fundamentally. At the end of Episode 9, Rey returns to Tatooine, to Luke's old homestead, as a nostalgic trip down memory lane. I think the blaster bolts are still in the dome of his home, if I remember. There's still blaster bolts from when, Owen and Beru were fucking burned alive, only for Rey to bury both Anakin and Leia's hilts in the sand before igniting her own new saber. Then a wandering lady asks her name, only for Rey to say that she's Rey Skywalker. And then she watches a binary sunset. And that is the final moment in the Skywalker saga. And I fucking hate it. Anakin despised Tatooine. He was a slave there. His mother died in his arms there. Luke didn't fondly remember Tatooine either. He already wanted to abandon Tatooine before his aunt and his uncle, his only known family, were burned alive there. Leia did not see Anakin as a father figure the way that Luke did. She had her own family on Alderaan, who were, killed by Vader. I know that this kind of sounds like the Donnie Darko scene with the fucking Smurfs, but this is basic 101 shit. This entire ending makes no sense within the context of Star Wars. None of these choices are made because it makes sense for any of these characters to do in this moment, but they are instead made because we as the audience recognize all this stuff. Almost as if the script itself is on its knees, profusely trying to prove its love for Star Wars. Not as a franchise of individual stories, but as a brand built off the back of solely what is fondly remembered, and nothing else. Episode 5, Pain. If it wasn't obvious enough, Rise of Skywalker went through a lot of rewrites. We probably all know what happened with the original Episode 9 by now. That movie, subtitled Duel of the Fates, was meant to be written and directed by Colin Trevorrow, but was scrapped in September of 2017. Days later, Disney makes the announcement that J.J. Abrams has been hired as the new director, leaving him and his new writing partner, Chris Terrio, about a few months to finalize the script before sets had to be built, since principal photography began in only August of 2018. Chris Terrio said that he'd never rewritten a film as much as The Rise of Skywalker. Marianne Brandon, Abrams' editor for both The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker, said herself that the production was rushed, given that they only had 2 years from start to finish, which was significantly less time than what they had on The Force Awakens. And because of that, Brandon had to be on set actively editing the film during production. Disney is pretty much known for pushing and getting their hands dirty in the production pot. For Episode 7, Lucasfilm hired Michael Arndt, a screenwriter known for taking his time, and asked if he could speed up the process. and when he wasn't able to, they fired him and had JJ team up with Lawrence Kasdan instead. This is just something that Disney has done for the past decade with Star Wars. Both Ben Mendelsohn and Tony Gilroy have spoken about the massive reshoots for Rogue One. The original directors of Solo were fired halfway through production and were replaced by Ron Howard. The only movie that didn't really have these issues was Episode 8, but because Disney is so risk-averse with all of their properties, both they and JJ recoiled back towards something familiar and safe. That's not to say that the production issues for Episode 9 are the only reason why the movie ended up the way it is. There's plenty of movies that I enjoy that are being held together by literal duct tape. Lots of stuff we like are literal miracles or remnants of dumpster fires. My issue with Episode 9 is that it was pretty much set up for failure from almost every direction. I've liked every new Star Wars movie to a varying degree, obviously excluding Episode 9 for reasons that I've been talking about for 30 minutes, but even to I, someone who's enjoyed a lot of modern Star Wars output, it's obvious that to the mouse, it's better to have a safe product that requires no challenges rather than a piece of art that says something. Anything, really. Everything great about Star Wars that's happened in the past decade has been in spite of Disney's mishandlings, not because of them. They constantly look at a problem that they themselves made and blame anything but the only common denominator. Movies aren't cool anymore, only Disney Plus shows. Even if it doesn't make sense as a Disney Plus show at all. Guys, we promise that this streaming thing is the future. When Return of the Jedi ended, Star Wars entered a dark era, where the franchise sort of lay dormant save for comics, books, and games up until The Phantom Menace. The second dark era was technically following the release of Revenge of the Sith up to Disney buying Lucasfilm, but in both cases I think that there was so much ancillary media that neither are really the case. However, if I was looking at Star Wars through this same lens, it would be my belief that this was the Dark Age. Not the time following the Rise of Skywalker, but the movie itself. It's a movie based on a shaky foundation and rushed to meet a December 2020 release, coincidentally the last holiday before a certain CEO would retire. There is no better comedic writer than time itself, since right after I finished recording this ending, Kathleen Kennedy officially announced that she was stepping down as the head of Lucasfilm, and also gave an exit interview to Deadline. And while the majority of the interview isn't all that important, especially the part where she talks about really wanting to work with AI so damn bad for some reason, Kennedy did touch on the hypocrisy of Disney. Mainly when in 2013, after Lucasfilm was bought by Disney, Bob Iger told her to be risky. Only as time has gone on, it's been more difficult getting projects approved. She also touches on the struggles of making new movies, all the while dealing with a vocal portion of the fan base that only really wants to see the same parts of the franchise over and over and over again. This doesn't really do much about what we talked about with Rise of Skywalker, but gives some sort of confirmation that the head of Lucasfilm has also acknowledged the difficulties of creating new Star Wars as the modern era goes on. Kennedy also said that she doesn't regret any of the creatives she hired, because why would she say anything else? It would actually be a bad thing if she took this time to shit on anybody specifically. I don't know, man. If the CEO of Star Wars is saying it's hard getting an original Star Wars movie made, then that says a lot about the creative process that goes into this franchise. Even if JJ wants to say little to nothing about the production process, it's clear that Disney put him, and by extension all of the cast and crew, under immense stress. Constantly rewriting character motivations, removing scenes, moving pieces constantly with a ticking clock in the background. Of course, this doesn't excuse both Abrams and Terrio's downright ridiculous interpretations of The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, as well as constant retcons, which pretty much would have always led to a disappointing conclusion. So instead, the film took the angle of an event film. It's not just the end of the sequel trilogy, it's the end of the Skywalker saga. That's why Palpatine is here, we promise. Please don't look at the man behind the curtain. If you don't agree, that's fine. I understand. At the end of the day, it's just a space wizard movie that I didn't like. Damn, maybe this is how people in the 80s sounded when they talked about hating the fucking Ewoks.
As the Force Awakens says, the evil Kylo Ren is attacking. You can take him on piece by piece. Build your hero and join the battle.